Here we got some writing stuff to do, so you have hopefully begun your discussion section. But what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at hypothesis and how to generate a hypothesis, how to test a hypothesis. Because if you recall, the first part of your discussion section is, does this study support, do the results support your hypothesis from the introduction? So we're going to be writing the introduction later. So write the discussion first, then write the introduction. But it is good to know about hypotheses right now so you can help formulate those so you can write your discussion section a little bit more efficiently. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We'll start with what goes into the discussion section, specifically how to deal with hypotheses. All right, so first the discussion section. So the discussion section, in terms of an outline, this is the outline you want to use. And we've looked at this, we introduced this a week ago. So just to reiterate, this is where you present the conclusions from your research. So does your study support the hypothesis that you had in the introduction, or do the results not support the hypothesis you had in the introduction? So that's how you start your conclusions. Are the hypotheses from your introduction supported or not supported? From that, you move to whether or not your research fits with the previous theory. So you've been reading about Roediger and McDermott and what they've said about reconstructive memory. Do what we have, or the results that we found in our study, do they fit with what they thought about reconstructive memory? Why or why not? You've read about Weldon and Bellinger and their theories about collaborative memory. Is what we found consistent with what they thought about collaborative memory? Why or why not? What is it about our results that don't fit with theirs? What is it about our results that do fit with theirs? That's where you talk about whether your research fits with previous theories. And then once you're done saying whether or not we have supported theories or not supported theories, basically whether or not these theories are more likely to be true or whether or not their truth has taken a hit because our results don't fit with them. Once you're done with that section, then you move on to implications of the research. Typically in a professional article, you would have theoretical implications. What does this mean for psychology as a science? As well as practical implications. What does this suggest we should do in the real world? Because this is your first intro to writing writing a research paper, we're going to go with the easier of those two, which is the practical implications. So given what you know about the results that we had, given what you know about what our results say about group memories and false memories, group memories and confidence, how should the world, one aspect of the world, work? So again, what does this say about the judicial system? What does this say about the education system? What does this say about group therapy? What does this say about group study sessions? What does it say about board meetings for the financial, whatever it is? What does this say about some situation that is being done in groups? Should it continue to be done in groups? Should it not continue to be done in groups? And if so, what are the dangers of that, in terms of false memories and in terms of confidence? Because remember that working in groups did not lead to any higher levels of false memories, but it did lead to higher confidence in those false memories. So try to think of situations where that might be a problem and make the recommendation. That would be your implication, saying that, well, in the education system, maybe we shouldn't do group learning, group learning groups under these situations. And then finally, we got your future research directions. What would be the next step? What's the next step that you would want to take in this study? And the key thing here is that you need a reason. So no idea is a good idea for a future research direction until you explain what does that idea mean. So if you say, well, I'm interested in autism, and I want to see if autistic children show these same patterns of false memory. So I would do this study with autistic children. Great, you would do this study with autistic children. Why? What would it show? Why would you think it would be any different? And this is where you say, yeah, I think autistic children would be interesting because they don't interact as much socially. So social interaction is underlying these group memory effects, then we should see less of these group memory effects in autistic children. If social interaction is not underlying these effects, then we should see exactly the same pattern. That's a great reason. Now it's a study I want to see. So make sure that whatever future research direction you suggest, say why it is that you want to do it. Not that it needs to be done or that you're interested in it or that you think it would be very interesting to do this. Specifically, here's a characteristic of this, future direction. And if that's true, this is what we should find. That's your explanation for a future research direction. Yep.
For the future research direction, that's strictly just like our opinion. Like if we were to run this experiment again, like there's no wrong answer to that.
There is absolutely no wrong answer to the future research direction.
As long as we can give a reason.
Yes.
Second thing, are we going to go through like how you have the discussion formatted? Like, is there a specific format we're supposed to be writing this in? Like, how there's like headers and everything?
Yeah. So it is the APA style that we've been doing up until this point.
So
Just like what we've been doing. Remember, you're doing the manuscript form, not the submitted actual form. So go to that one experiment sample paper that you have in your textbook for a visual look at what it's supposed to look like. But basically, so far we've introduced APA headers, so that continues on into this discussion section. We've introduced the numbers, so that goes into this discussion section. If you're using numbers, make sure they're formatted correctly. And then the Times New Roman 12-point font, 1-inch margins all around, that's still going. The big new one here, and I don't know if I have it up on these slides, but the big new one is also citations. Is going to be a big one for the discussion section. So check the APA guidelines on citations. Citations basically have rules for whether they're an in-text citation or whether they're in parentheses. So if you mention the names of the authors in the text, if you say something like, Roediger and McDermott did this experiment, you would have Roediger and McDermott in the text. In brackets, you would have the year, 1995, and then you would say, did this experiment. If you say something like, researchers have studied reconstructive memory, and then in parentheses, you have Roediger and McDermott, comma, the year, those are two different ways to format citations. And in the one where they're in the text, the and is the word A-N-D. In the one where they're in parentheses, the and is the ampersand. So there's rules for in-text and out-of-text citation. There's rules for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 author citations. So if your article has 6 authors, check the rules for how to cite 6 authors. And there's basically a whole slew of rules depending upon what type of source you're using. So check those in your APA, check those rules out. It'll be touched on in your appendix from your textbook. Also online resources like the OWL Purdue library resource online. You can find all examples of APA as well. But do check your citations, make sure that you're citing correctly, because when you're talking about previous theories, you have to cite, because you're talking about Weldon and Bellinger, so you got to give them a citation. You're talking about Roediger and McDermott, so you're going to have to give them a citation. So make sure that you're checking, is it in text, is it in parentheses, how many authors, and all that kind of little details. It's pretty straightforward, but if I was to enumerate all of the instances, we'd probably be here for the entire class. And it's just much simpler just to look it up and just be aware of that. All right, was those the 2 questions?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so the tip that I mentioned in terms of how to start, so how to present the conclusions from your research, the tip is to start your discussion section with whether or not your results support or refute your hypotheses from the introduction. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because we haven't written the introduction yet. But if you come up with the hypotheses, like we're going to show you how to do today, then you'll have a much easier time of writing the discussion, which will then give you a much greater ability to write the introduction. So you should start whether your results support or refute your hypothesis from the introduction. And the hint here is that one of your hypotheses, you need at least one. You can have more than one. 2 is usually preferable. One of them should support the hypothesis. That is, you should have one hypothesis in the introduction that after the entire experiment you find out, oh yeah, that hypothesis is true. And if that's not the case, rewrite your introduction. So these hypotheses, to give you an analogy, these are your suspects in your murder mystery novel. And you need to set up suspects in the introduction of your murder mystery novel. And then by the end of it, one of those suspects needs to be the murderer. If by the end of it, none of those suspects is the murderer, go back and rewrite your introduction so that one of them is the murderer. Same thing when you're writing your research report. Yep?
So if you have two hypotheses, does only one have to agree with it then?
Yes.
So if you have multiple, only one needs to agree with it.
Exactly. And those are actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Those are actually better, more engaging articles where you have two hypotheses or more. Because that's like, again, the analogy is the murder mystery novel, where if you just have one suspect, right? It's like the old Scooby-Doo cartoons. You know, when you're watching them as a kid, you're like, oh, I wonder who the spooky specter is. And then you watch them as an adult, and you're like, there's one other character in this entire story. Of course, it's Old Man Jim. It's got to be, right? That's what a one hypothesis paper is like. If you're like, oh, well, this theory predicts this, then by the end of it, you're like, well, I'm pretty sure that's what they're going to find. But just because of the way that our human minds work, if you can come up with something that says, oh, this hypothesis predicts that groups should have higher confidence for their false memories, but this other theory leads to the hypothesis where groups should have lower confidence for their false memories, all of a sudden the reader is like, oh my gosh, one theory says higher confidence, the other theory says lower confidence. Oh, which one is it? What's it going to be? I can't wait till they get to the end. It's just more engaging that way. But you need one. Like in this course, you don't need two. Two is great if you can make it, but you need at least one. You need at least one that says, according to this theory here, this is what we should find in our study. And then if you only have the one, by the end of it, that's what you find in your study. If you got two, then one of them might be right, one of them might be wrong. They could both be right. They could have both predicted the results, as long as they're both not wrong. Because you don't want it where none of your hypotheses are supported, because again, that's like getting to the end of a murder mystery novel, and none of the introduced characters ends up being the murderer. And it's even worse than introducing a final character in the final act, because if none of them are the murderer, you're basically like, could you imagine reading a murder mystery novel where they're like, well, it's not the butler, it's not the maid, and it's not the mailman. I guess we'll never know. The end, right? I mean, it's not satisfying. All right. So how do we get these hypotheses? So we do want a hypothesis that's supported, and you start off your discussion with our results support hypothesis number one, that we would find higher, confidence levels in groups. Our results do not support hypothesis number two, that said we should find lower confidence, right? So whatever it is, you start off with our results either support this hypothesis or don't. So how do we get those hypotheses? Well, we do it by taking a look at our results and then seeing whether or not the theories that we know of, the theories that we've been reading about in our journal articles, if those theories are true and we did what we did in our experiment, what should we have found? And that is the essence of a hypothesis. If this theory is true and we did our experiment, then this should have occurred. That's that if-then hypothesis structure. So when you're working on your hypotheses, keep in mind that we got 4 key results. And the first thing to keep in mind is that your hypothesis does not have to predict all 4. So do not for a second think that you need to have one theory that somehow predicts all 4 of these outcomes. You need a theory that predicts one of them at least. Maybe you'll get 2, I don't know, but at least one of them is doable. So we have 4 key results. We got the percent recall for correct items, right? We have the simplified version that singles recalled fewer correct items than groups did. That's key result number 1. Singles recalled fewer items than groups. So we need a theory that predicts either that this should have happened or predicts that this should not have happened. We need a theory that touches on percent recall for correct items and singles versus groups. So we can take a look at things like Weldon and Bellinger. And in Weldon and Bellinger, they have a theory, and they put forward this theory that collaborative groups, actually this is a result, collaborative groups recalled more than individuals, but less than nominal groups. So this is going to be an example of how to work with theories that might not touch exactly on what you're doing. So the first move that I'll mention is that notice that we've simplified what we're talking about. We're talking about singles versus groups. Not singles versus pairs versus triples. We've said, all right, let's just kind of conceptualize this as these people are single, these people are in groups, because that way you can apply any study that has looked at singles versus groups. It might be groups of 5. It doesn't matter, singles versus groups. It might be groups of 2. It doesn't matter, singles versus groups. It might be groups of 10. Doesn't matter, single versus groups. So by changing this to singles versus groups, it makes it easier to connect research that might have used 5 people instead of just 1. So the next thing here is you take a statement like this, where in Weldon and Bellinger, collaborative groups were called more than individuals, but less than nominal groups. And sometimes you'll see a theory like this, or a result like this, and you want to use part of it, but you can't use all of it, because we didn't have nominal groups. We didn't do that aspect of it. So you can just take that out, and you can say, all right, well, Weldon and Bellinger said this, but what applies to our situation is that collaborative groups recalled more than individuals. So, collaborative groups recalled more than individuals, which means that groups of students, collaborative groups, should recall more correct words than individual students. So, if collaborative groups recalled more than individuals, and we did our experiment, then we should find that the groups of students recalled more correct words than individuals. This is the prediction from the hypothesis. And lo and behold, we found that groups recalled more than singles. That's what we predicted. Our results support this hypothesis. So this is one example of a hypothesis that you can make, that if this theory is true and we do our experiment, then we should find groups of students should recall more correct words than individuals. So far, so good? Okay, so that is key result number 1. We also have key result number 2 of 4. For the critical items, for the false memories, singles recalled the same amount of false memories as groups, right? So singles here had the same proportion of false memories as the 2 groups here did. So once again, we need a theory that touches on how much should groups recall and how much should singles recall. So we go back to Weldon and Bellinger, and they had a prediction. They had a result that said collaborative groups recall more than individuals. So if that's the case, notice that they don't say anything about false memories or correct memories. They just say collaborative groups recall more than individuals. So in that case, if collaborative groups recall more than individuals, and we set up a situation where false memories are recalled, according to this, we predict that groups of students should recall more critical words than individuals. According to this, that's what should have happened in our experiment. However, groups of students should recall more critical words. Groups of students did not recall more critical. It was the same. So in this case, our results do not support this hypothesis. So you can see that our results for the correct words support Weldon and Bellinger's theories on collaborative memory. Our results from the false memories do not support Weldon and Bellinger's theories on false memory. All right, confidence for correct items. Now let's take a look at the 2 confidence parts of it. So for the confidence for correct items, we found that singles are just as confident as pairs in groups of 3. So we can say this in terms of singles are just as confident as groups. So we can take a look at Weldon and Bellinger once again. And lo and behold, it says, well, in Weldon and Bellinger, it goes, collaborative groups were called more than individuals. Weldon and Bellinger did nothing on confidence. You could really try to stretch and do some sort of complicated chain of reasoning to kind of bring this into the confidence era, the confidence realm. Or you can more logically and correctly, I would argue, realize that Weldon and Bellinger didn't touch on confidence, and that's fine. So they make no prediction, right? They didn't measure confidence. They didn't look at confidence. We have this confidence result. They have a theory that makes no prediction. That's fine, right? We don't need one theory to predict everything. We just need one theory to predict at least one of the four results that we have. So in this case, in the introduction, we wouldn't make a prediction about confidence. We wouldn't have a hypothesis about what we would expect to happen in confidence based on Weldon and Bellinger's data. Now, Roediger and McDermott, they have the remember know paradigm that they use. They had the thing where people rated, is this a word that you remember, or is this a word that you know was on the list? And that ties into confidence. So you could tie in Roediger and McDermott's to make a prediction for confidence here. But as it turns out, to just finish this off, confidence for critical items. Singles had less confidence than groups for the critical items for the false memories. And once again, going back to Weldon and Bellinger, they got nothing to say. So if you realize that they don't touch upon confidence, if they're not talking about confidence, don't try to stretch it and make a prediction about confidence. You have 6 sources, you have 6 articles. Use another article and make a prediction based on those articles. So that's just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable if you're looking at a theory and you're like, well, this is a great theory, but I can't connect it to our experiment. That's fine. That's no worries there. Get another theory and connect it to this part, or connect it to another one of those key results. All right, so this is basically how you would come up with hypotheses. So based on your readings, pick out a theory, make a hypothesis. If this theory is true, given what we did in our experiment, what should we find? If the prediction is what we found, then our results support that hypothesis. If the prediction is not what we found, then our results do not support that hypothesis. Mm-hmm.
So do we only have to find, make a hypothesis through one article, or is it for all of them?
It can just be one.
But then we
Yeah.
still compare it to all the other ones in the discussion, or just that one?
Not necessarily. So what you would want, some of them might say the same things. A lot of this work was built on Roediger and McDermott's. So they might all have, this sort of reconstructive framework of memory. But usually, these different articles exist because they have different ideas. So you don't have to do it for all 6. Now, at some point, just so that we're clear on this, you will cite all 6 articles in your research paper. There's a requirement that somehow they all go into your research paper. Now, just defining these terms, setting up the idea of reconstructive memory and group memory in the introduction is where you're going to cite a lot of your articles. And in your results, in your discussion section, our results support this idea is where you can cite other ideas. But if you do have that one article that's left over, if you have that one article where you just can't fit it in the introduction and you just can't fit it into your discussion section at the beginning, the implications is one possible place always to put that one last little article and basically say, oh, my article is about the education system. It looked at reconstructive memory in the education system. So one implication for us, based on what they said about this article, and you can cite it there. If that doesn't work, your last and guaranteed option is the future research. And basically say, I'm thinking of looking at false memories in the mating patterns of wolves, because this article was on the mating patterns of wolves and I need to cite it. So according to them, wolves mate according to these rules, and if there's false memories, then we'll find this, but if there's no false memories, we'll find that. That future research directions is always your last guaranteed hope to get that final citation.
So for the discussion, you don't have to
No, you don't have to go through all 6 articles.
Is there like a limit that you, like a minimum that you want us to compare
One.
this to? Just one?
1, I mean, that's the minimum. 2 would be great. If you can find, again, so the requirements of it is you have one theory that you made a prediction on, you made a hypothesis on, and in the discussion section, you say, yes, this supported that hypothesis because it predicted this, we found this, and then, yes, that supports this theory because it says, you know, that's the minimum requirement. If you got 2, it's not required, but if you got 2 hypotheses, it's just more compelling to say something like, oh, it supported this hypothesis was supported, but this one was not, right? But really, just for the exercise of making sure we can do a hypothesis, making sure we can tie it back to a theory, we just need the one. And it just needs to be on one of these things. So if you can't at all tie in the confidence results, that's fine. Make your predictions about the percent recall. If you can't do the percent recall, then you're reading Roediger and McDermott or Weldon and Bellinger incorrectly, right? Because it's all, you know, they do use those. But yeah, if you can't tie them all in, that's fine. You don't need to.
But you can use different ones for
Oh, yeah.
hypothesis?
Oh, yes.
Like we don't use this one same word?
Nope, not at all. This is just to illustrate it.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. So just a reminder, there's the due dates, November 18th by midnight. Has to be submitted on time. This is the last one that's going to be peer reviewed, so make sure that you submit that on time so it can be included in that peer review process. The sweet spot for this, you know, you put in enough sort of detail, enough information, enough explanation. We're looking for that 2.5 pages of double-spaced text again, 12-point font, 1-inch margins all around, and anonymously submitted through Turnitin, and then it will be added to the peer review. All right, any final questions on the discussion section? All right.